legends and lies live longer than the truth sometimes, but one of the legends that someone told me about, or I read it somewhere, is that Matthew Vassar came to Lexington to see how a college for women should conduct itself. And so he was looking at that time, Sayre College, and he said, well, this is the proper place. And he returned to Poughkeepsie, New York, and established Vassar College. How about that?
Always wanted to be a headmaster. When he'd gotten his master's at the University of Kentucky in education, he wrote his thesis on running a new school. So for him, it was something that he had some long-term focus on.
Don was teaching senior English at Lafayette, and he was using college freshman English books to teach, so the kids who took that class could skip freshman English when they went to college.
Well, I was one of the students who considered themselves the lucky ones at Lafayette in my senior year, because I was included in Mr. Hollingworth's senior English class. And Mr. Hollingworth was actually quite a famous guy for an English teacher at Lafayette. The what was it, the Herald Leader, actually did stories about Mr. Hollingsworth in the newspaper. If you go back to the old Herald Leader, you'll find some of them. There were stories about Don Hollingsworth, and he was famous in Lexington because of his ability to inspire the kids and ask them to do impossible tasks, and then they reveled in doing it.
The headmistress, when Don was hired, had been the wife of a Presbyterian preacher at First Pres. And that's how she got the job, because all these preachers. Sayre had been ladies' finishing school years ago. And David A. Sayre was a big Presbyterian, and all of that melded in together. And she was doing an excellent job, but she was one of the persons that talked to the board and said, we need somebody young, we need to do this. She said, I'm not the one to do it. She was ready to retire. And excellent lady. So that's how Don got the job. His brother Kent had a friend who was connected some way with the old Sayre School board. Maybe this fellow's children were going to kindergarten or something, because Sayre had boys and girls kindergarten through the 6th and 7th grade. And I think the 7th grade, near the end there, had 3 or 4 students. I don't think it was a real 7th grade. But this board, at the time that Don was hired, was the Presbyterian preachers of this area. That's not a good school board. They were funny and interesting, but No, they weren't the right guys to be the board. A new board came in, and they said, we're looking for somebody to put a high school, make Sayre a preparatory school. And Kent said, well, my brother Don was in a private school as a kid in St. Louis, and he's a good teacher, why don't you ask him? And so the board came and asked him if he would be interested. And he thought that was an exciting, interesting thing, and he said, sure. So when he was hired by the board, being a Hollingsworth, and the Hollingsworth family kind of knows its own way and doesn't like to do exactly like everybody else. So he said, if you hire me, I cannot be the new headmaster by committee. I have to do it my way. And can I do this? Will you hire me with that intent? And the board agreed, yeah, we'll back you. Marion L.L. Short was one of the board members. He had a daughter, Julie Short, that had been at Sayre all along. And he was on Don's side. He was on Don's team always supported him. They agreed that he could do it his way. So he came home and he said, I've got a new job. I'm not going to teach at Lafayette anymore. And I said, what? And he said, no, the Sayre School wants to put a high school on, and they're hiring me to do it. So I said, well, that sounds exciting, and it was.
I can tell you what my father said when he started at Sayre. And he said, you got to pay me 10 grand a year or I ain't going. $10,000 a year is what they paid him. And he thought that was big money at the time, having come from the public school system that was paying substantially less. So, right. So what I would think is, what would Father say about a headmaster making $300,000 a year? I think Father would have just fallen off his chair. He would have thought of all the good things that money could have gone for, as opposed to his pocket. It was an exciting time for him. He was a teacher, but he made more money farming than he did teaching. And I think he approached the project at Sayre sort of like the farm. He brought an old tenant farmer in to be the maintenance guy, Charlie Abney. He didn't have any money, much, to pay people. So part of his solution was to recruit family and friends to come over and teach and be a part of this program. Ford Waller was one of his friends from a long time that came along. Through the years, a lot of Hollingsworths were involved in teaching and being a part of that program to help build it up. And it was more out of necessity, I think, at that point, because they would work for a lot less at the time. He was always in the business of trying to figure out how to raise money for the school at that time, because it was not the beacon of the community that would attract tons of people that wanted to be on the board of directors at that time. He was fortunate to get C.V. Whitney involved, and later his wife. He had Joe Johnson involved, who got him involved in first place, and Joe cared. And Joe and his brother, Father's brother Kent, had been law partners together, so they had a relationship, and that's how Father came into that play in the first place. But Joe was in a position to make a difference financially if things needed help. But it took a while to create a board of directors that could bring the money in that's necessary to run a private school. You don't do it from tuition, never has been, never will be, but it took a bit for that to happen.
Yeah, your point is that there was a moment in time that Don Hollingsworth took that school from hell. It was dead. It was gone. Doors are going to close. And he took it, and he took everybody, and he built it up, and made it, and look what it is today.
Another individual who came to Sayre in 1962 was Amos Lawrence, who had come from Oregon. Amos had left Oregon because of a divorce, and he had traveled across country selling silos, of all things, and had landed here in Lexington and went to work at the Lexington School with Marilyn Turner, and was one of the first individuals hired at the Lexington School, and Amos. But Amos didn't get along with the headmaster at the Lexington School at that time, whose name was Bud Pritchard. And they just had two different ways of operating. And so Bud let Amos go. And when he let Amos go, Amos came over to interview with Don, and Don Hollingsworth was short-handed, didn't have anybody to help him run the school. And so Don hired Amos. Amos would eventually go on to become assistant headmaster under Don Hollingsworth, but he also did, for a short time, he was the college counselor, he was the head of the fourth form, he was a tennis coach. In fact, his tennis teams did very well, and he was lower school head. So he became very much a fixture at Sayre School, and was there until 1976 when he married Betty Garr. Betty Garr had attended Sayre and was a member of the class in 1940. He and Betty had met and courted, and they married in 1976. And when they married, he retired from teaching education, and they lived here in Lexington until Amos's death. Dorothy Hancock was the bookkeeper for the school, and Mary Castle kept the records for the school. So it was Dorothy and Mary's office, and Dorothy and Mary and myself all became very close.
Mrs. Hancock was told by Mrs. Miles to Don when he took the job, "You will appreciate the woman in the office. She can run the school. She is very capable, and she knows how to do it, to handle everything, the books and everything." So he and Mrs. Hancock got along splendidly. Don wrote a lot of stuff, and his handwriting was terrible. He'd write fast and hard to read. Dorothy Hancock could always read his handwriting, which was great. Then Mary Castle had worked for the Blood Horse, and Uncle Kent said she needs a job or she'd like to work at Sayre, so she came over and helped and was organized and good and fell right in with the family. Clay Hancock graduated and came back and worked in the office for a while and became a good buddy of Mrs. Hancock's. She was in the first graduating class, the 65th.
My husband and I came to Lexington. We had been in Tokyo, living in Tokyo, and it was in 1965. We came to Detroit, and my husband worked in Detroit at the University of Detroit. He worked as bookkeeping and supply person. And so he did that, and I taught in Grosse Pointe Public Schools. I taught chemistry there. And we decided to come back. We had been in Lexington as students in the late 50s, and he wanted to come back to Lexington because he loved this area and he liked the people. He came to Lexington because we had visited Bill Kelly down here, Bill and Donna Kelly, our good friends, and he was going to try to help my husband get employment down here. So he talked to Don Hollingsworth, his friend, and Don, at first he didn't want to make any commitment about it, but we came down and my husband interviewed with Don, and Don hired him on the spot. Yes, he did some fundraising for going out in the community and so on, but he was busy mostly with the operation of the school and, you know, getting things, keeping things going down there, managing down there. But I must say, in all of his time in America, that faculty and staff that he worked with there, he enjoyed that more than any place he ever worked. He loved it there. He absolutely did. He loved the people, the teachers, the students, the whole thing. Don used him kind of as a person to break the bad news to people. He was the good cop, bad cop. He was the bad cop.
Thank God Nancy Thompson was around at that point in time, because she had a great deal of talent, knowledge of what it was to get the alumni involved, and we instituted the grand classes. We needed to get them involved because that gave, you know, a lot of substance to the school and solidified the history within the city of Lexington. And she was instrumental in that. And then we formed, at some point, it was the Sayre Club, which was a giving club that had levels of giving so that people could identify with some of the goals of the school and how we could achieve them.
Also, what happened is that one day a little tiny 3x5 card came in the mail. They handed it to me. It was from St. Louis Union Trust, St. Louis, Missouri. And, well, what's this all about? So I called them, and they said that we were a beneficiary from an estate. And it turned out to be the great-grandson of the man who gave the original house and property for Sayre School. It was his great-grandson. He had gone off to war. He'd come back. He'd gone to work for Pabst Blue Ribbon. He had accumulated stock. He had to buy 5,000 shares of Pabst Blue Ribbon stock in order to get a job there. They made him do it. That was part of, somehow or another, that was associated with his employment. So that became more than, you know, as the shares split over time. And he died, and he had never visited Sayre School, but he knew that his grandfather had given the house and the money. Don and I flew to St. Louis, and we sat down at St. Louis Union Trust, and we're told that we're going to be the recipient of some money, and when the housekeeper died, we're going to get some more money. And, you know, things happen. You never know.
Sayre School, pre-K through 12, was the least expensive private institution in the nation in 1966. It was the least expensive. And the teachers didn't get paid well, nobody was paid well, and everybody did everything. You could teach your regular classes, and, you know, if you were worth your salt or were truly a Sayre person, you worked after hours and coached something because you volunteered.
He had begun to have developed with the board a growth plan for the school, which involved a high school and some others. So they had that basic growth plan established, and some preliminary drawings, and they were doing fundraising, going out to raise money to go on and build this so they could add a grade a year.
Mrs. Miles, she had told Don that C.V. Whitney was living now at the farm outside of town, and that he would be a big help to the school because he would be glad to give money. And she said, talk to him, because what you need to begin with, tell him what your needs are.
My father, M.L.L. Short, was the head of the board, and it was the new beginning of Sayre School in 1961. It was at that point they realized that they needed a gymnasium. So my father, along with Don Hollingsworth, went over to Sonny Whitney's house to ask them if they would be willing to give money to build a Sayre gymnasium.
He says, well, first off, we need a gymnasium. They were using the Little Red Schoolhouse at one time for sports. You know how small that building was?
And C.V. agreed to give $100,000 to build a gym, which was really important because Father was a strict and firm believer in athletics, in the sense that he believed in a rounded education. And his approach to education was, in the classroom and on the playing fields, which was pretty traditional. C.V. accommodated him and agreed to provide that money, and they built the Whitney Gym, which was available, I guess, in the fall of 1962. Mrs. DeWall was kind enough to put up some early money for the DeWall-Headley building, which became the high school. And Father started construction with, not all the money. He started construction with the first $250,000 that she gave to start that building, to start that high school. So by the fall of 1963, we had a new high school building to go into.
In 1963, Mrs. DeWall, who was a grande dame in Lexington and quite a wonderful character, gave money to build the high school. I remember as a child her coming over to have tea with my mother, and she would never say, "Forget the tea, bring me my martini, please." And I thought that was really cool. I liked Mrs. DeWall.
Lower school was in the left-hand building, if you're looking at Old Sayre, and kindergarten was down in the basement. We moved up in later years to the other floors there. We do remember my brothers and sisters went there too. Dunn had Mrs. Wittenberg for second grade, and at one point she had to tape him down to the chair with some duct tape because he was being unruly.
We raised $350,000. I'll never forget going to Lily McAshan. Don said, get an appointment with her. I did. We went out to see her, and I had never seen a person sit down at a desk and write a check for $75,000. That was beyond my comprehension, I didn't grow up with that kind of money, but she did it. And she made the remark that her accountant told her she had to give away X number of dollars that year. So for the real money, Don would tell me, call so-and-so and we'll go see them. Remember, there was a little schoolhouse, and then there was this open ground over to the right of it. Well, that ground was a playground for elementary school kids, and over the years, I guess the ground got hard. Well, it came time we scheduled the groundbreaking ceremony because we knew we had the money. And so we gathered around, and O.A. Backus was chairman, and he said a few words, and then it came time to break ground. Well, It hadn't dawned on me that a playground had been played on for 20 years might be hard. We all put the shovels down, and we might have gotten a thimble full of dirt. All we got was these little scraps, and the women couldn't get anything, and I think I got a little bit on my shovel. I'll put it this way. We got a few grains of earth, and that was our groundbreaking ceremony. Mrs. Lawrence, Reverend Lawrence's wife, she brought me a bottle of champagne and said something to the effect, "You did it." Think about this, in 1968, 69, we built a 3-story classroom building for $350,000. That was it.
We went through till I think 3rd or 4th grade, I'd have to look to be sure, but at some point they built what I, until this year, thought of as the new lower school, although they've now dropped that and put a real new lower school in. But we had, typical of Uncle Don, we moved on a school day and all of the kids went to their classroom, picked up their desk, and walked down that little road from the back end all the way what became our carpool lane. And I remember me and Cousin Amory walking down, carrying our desks and getting all the way down and going into the new building. Cool new building. It had an APR, an all-purpose room, down on in the lower right when you went in, and corners, and I was there. I remember John Hackworth as 5th grade teacher, and I remember John Lackey explaining the only bit of class lore from 6th grade was, what do you need to start a helium bomb? You need an atom bomb to ignite it, was what I recall from those years.
So when we moved to the lower school, all the kids did the moving. You wouldn't do that today. You couldn't get away with it. You know, the parents would say, "My kid is doing what?" You know? But back then, that's what we were going to do. It's the way it was going to get done. So all the kids moved the classroom.
When they were tearing down the north wing of the old school to put up the library, I was there one late afternoon, and a gentleman was walking around the building, and I stopped to talk to him. And he said, "Do you know how the foundation was laid on this building?" And I said, "I have absolutely no idea." This was a black man. And he said, the bricks here on this building, in this building, were made on this property. And if you look at the pointing on the bricks, you will see that it's much thinner than the pointing that's used today, because they use a lot more limestone than a different mortar they use today. And he said, "You wouldn't have a key to see inside this old building, would you?" I said, "Well, actually, I do." He said, "Can we go inside?" And I said, "Of course." So we go inside, and we go down into the basement. And, you know, he said, "These foundation stones were laid according to the sign of the moon." They said, "Well, the old guys, they sort of like, you know, like the pyramids were built. You know, they're put together pretty good." It lasted a long time. And so they understood that something about the nature of the moon, if you place the foundation right, they won't settle. How many cracks do you see inside this interior wall? And there were none. And the school's been there since 1854, but the house that belonged to Mr. Sayre was constructed prior to that. Look at these huge stones on the outside leading up to the main entrance of the old Sayre. How would you like to put one of those in place in the 1850s? Yeah, quite a feat, quite a remarkable feat. That was a wonderful story from this gentleman who had stopped to see the handiwork of some of his family. It's a touching story.
It's the Edward F. Sims Library. Lily Webb was on the board at the time. It was a Lampa farm. But there were some good people on the board of trustees that I'm sure helped out with the funding. And of course, people out in the community and parents and so forth.
Oh, I must remember the librarians. It was always a warm place that everybody loved to come in and talk and visit and get books, and they made it a really warm and welcoming place, the librarians. Miss Becky Hollingsworth and Ann Alcorn. And we had a great library situation there. And then they moved into the bigger library, but still they continued the same type of atmosphere in the new library.
It was interesting to meet these teachers. I remember the first meeting where Don spoke to them, and I was sitting there, and I kept wanting to say things, and I thought, no, Leslie, you got to keep your mouth shut. This doesn't have anything to do with you. It's your husband who is going to take the job. And they were all women teachers, and they were there for a long time there and stayed for a long time. Really great women. And they thought, okay, I think we can work with this young guy, even though he's got ideas that may not be ours. And it was a very agreeable situation when he went in, because he supported them and they supported him. So it went real well.
I was Director of Development and Teaching. Don became president of the Independent School Association of Kentucky. Maybe it was a 2 or 3 year term. And the state of Kentucky came after us and wanted to know how many certified teachers we had. Well, we did not have all certified teachers. We had some. And so they were making noises about we should have all certified teachers. All right, so Don called me in and he gave me the assignment of getting a bill through the state legislature that independent schools in Kentucky did not have to have certified teachers. So I spent, I don't know, 6 months. I spoke in front of committees, both the House and the Senate. I called every member of the legislature to speak out and try to push forward a bill that independent schools didn't have. And I got somebody to sponsor a bill and co-sponsor and all that kind of stuff. And lo and behold, they passed a bill that independent schools did not have to have certified teachers. Okay, that turns out to be very important in my life. I wasn't certified myself. More than half the faculty wasn't certified.
The teachers at Sayre, for me, was a special relationship. In order to survive on $6,000, you damn well better care about what you're doing, and you better care about the people you're doing it with. Otherwise, why would you be there? Because you can walk across the street and make 3 times as much money, even back in the 60s or 70s.
Sometimes he'd bring someone that was a prospective teacher, and he'd come out to the house and ask me what I thought. So I said, well, if they think they're all right with me.
I do want to talk just briefly, and Carolyn would certainly concur with this. We both have vivid memories of Don in faculty meetings, especially at the beginning of a school year. And I'm sure he was, part of his talk was, well, we don't have quite as much money as we need to have, but we'll get by, and so forth and so on. But then he would begin to inspire us like nobody I've ever seen before or since. It'd be the first faculty meeting where we'd all gotten together, the whole schools together, before the school year begins. And it was like a master football coach. He would get us so pumped to do the best damn job we could possibly do. And he'd say, now I know none of you are paid enough, which was really true. But I have faith in you, and I know that you're going to do a great job for the kids, and so forth and so on and so on. I mean, I can't even begin to replicate what he would say. But all I can tell you is the feeling, at least for Carolyn and me, was, and I think others as well, was, man, we were ready to go and do it. And we didn't care what we got paid. By golly, we were working for Sayre School and for Don Hollingsworth, and we'd do whatever needed to be done. And your contract actually did read some, you were going to teach the 6th grade or 5th grade, or you were going to be head librarian, and do whatever else is necessary for the betterment of Sayre School. I mean, there was some sort of catch-all phrase in everybody's contract that, hey, well, it says it right there, you're going to do it. So, anyway, but we all did it.
Because of Don Hollingsworth and the freedom that he gave you, you could do anything except destroy the classroom next to you. You couldn't destroy the classroom next to you, but otherwise, you were on your own. You were free. Earl Remus could teach the way he wanted to teach. Walt could teach the way he wanted to teach. Hopkins could teach the way she wanted to teach. God, there was freedom there.
Tommy Grunwald, still remembering the geography, and I can hear him yelling at us in class about various things, and doing the bow and arrow. And there's a picture I have with us at some smelting. We were learning about blacksmiths, and we had a small forge going, and the coals, and there was a blower and some bellows, and we looked what happened when the metal got hot and you hit it with a hammer. He was a very experiential teacher, and it was certainly the most fun I think we had in school.
He was the steady hand in the school that just carried the whole thread all the way through. And he was just an outstanding person.
Well, I was teaching at double sessions at the Fayette County Schools at Hamilton Hall. And one of my students was, mother was a teacher at Sayre. And somehow she decided that I was a pretty good math teacher, and she reported that to Don Hollingsworth. Don Hollingsworth called me and said he'd like to see me. I went over. He said, I'd like to give you a job. And I said, I have a job, and I'm on double sessions, but I will work 1 or 2 classes in the morning, and I teach double sessions for the county in the afternoon. That worked out pretty good, and he gave me a job teaching. I taught math, science in junior high, and at high school I taught biology and anthropology.
Other early faculty members of that period who come to mind are Mac Bailey, one of the most creative individuals that I ever worked with. He had a master's degree in anthropology, which always surprised people, but he taught middle school mathematics and science, and looked like a stevedore off the docks of New York. He he was clever, not only clever, but insightful in how to work with children. He came up with a game called Baileyville, and children in the 7th and 8th grade would play Baileyville, and the whole idea was to try to teach them something about economics, and as well as to practice their mathematics, their arithmetic, and calculations and that sort of stuff. But Baileyville was a game sort of like Monopoly. Everybody had money, and you could invest your money or play with your money, and it was quite popular at the time.
In math class, I started a thing called Baileyville, and this is where the students would choose a profession, and they would look up what those people earn, plumbers, bankers, and each one had a job, and they would earn money, play money, and they would pay their bills and write checks, and sort of just like it's sort of built on Monopoly. That's what it was like. And I did that, but it's a lot of work. Let me tell you what, that is hard work, because you have to write the questions, you have to have all the surprise answers, but it went pretty good. And I was invited to the National Math Teachers Conference, and I don't remember the year. One of two teachers from Kentucky that were invited to go there and speak, and I spoke on Baileyville.
Oh, my favorite teacher was Mac Bailey. The only 2 A's I ever got in school were from Mac Bailey. I loved biology and I loved anthropology. He was so good at making you want to learn that. And that's the gift of any teacher, to make you want to learn. That's what it's all about. A typical test in Mac's class for anthropology would be he'd just dump a cardboard box in your desk, say, here. And you looked in, it was a pile of bones. So you had to identify every bone, which rib it was, which whatever. It was so much fun. Thank you, Mac.
Pam Woodford, Miss Woodford, she was a great teacher. And Ed Hall was a great math teacher as well. But let me mention one truly outstanding teacher would be John Lackey. And he just got the students, he was so mild-mannered, and he got the students just to do so many outstanding things. We worked so hard, the teachers did there. I taught 5 different preparations a day, 5 different varieties of classes, which is almost unheard of, certainly in the county. But the classes were small, and the kids were cooperative. And so I taught some math classes, and I taught biology, and I taught chemistry, and I taught physics, and I taught mostly chemistry's my area. But Don told me he wanted me to teach physics, so I went back that summer to Transylvania and took a class in physics. Of course, it's similar to chemistry and math, so I could come back and teach it then. It took a lot of preparation, but I did that.
Well, one of my favorite faculty members was Mrs. Wolfram, who was the form head, and Mrs. Hopkins was a great teacher, and Leah Hanau was a good teacher. I think the freedom that teachers were given by Don Hollingsworth is one of the things that made the school great.
After Mrs. Tuttle in 3rd grade, there was Miss Finney in 4th, Miss Hicks, Amanda Hicks in 5th, and Pixie Priest in 6th. She was, I just thought she was, beautiful.
I came to Sayre in the 4th grade and was at Sayre for 8 years. My first teacher at Sayre was Mrs. Finney, who was a great connection for me. I was at a new school. I came from University High School, and they had decided to close down, and so Mrs. Finney really embraced me and made me feel like I was at home. And I think that those early years at Sayre were something that are just very special. The teachers would keep up with you as you went on to be in upper grades, and it was really just kind of a warm and fuzzy feeling to have Mrs. Finney as the starting teacher.
My first grade teacher was Mrs. Bishop, and her classroom was on the far side of Old Sayre where Mr. Kikuchi's office later was, and we could come up the side steps that went straight into that classroom. And I can recall vividly Mrs. Bishop putting a newspaper, that was when the Herald Leader was the Herald and Leader, because it was morning and afternoon. And she put a newspaper on the table and she said to us, "Someday you're going to be able to read that." And we were all, "Are you kidding me? There is no way that we're going to, those are so tiny, those little letters, and they're all squashed together. I don't think that's ever going to happen."
I was telling Bob when we came over here, the teachers would be in the lounge complaining and griping about these kids and how awful.
Yeah.
And Miss Hopkins said, "Now wait a minute." She said, "You're not looking at the finished product."
Yeah.
That's what she would say. She said, "Just wait." So this is not the finished product. So don't be discouraged.
Dad believed in the teachers and the importance of the teachers at Sayre, so he started a fund for 2 teachers to be awarded yearly, and they were given this money to do whatever they wished. It was their sort of fun money. He felt they just enjoyed to do something that they normally wouldn't afford to be able to do.
Don used to sit there and sit back in his chair and put his feet on the desk. And the reason that happened, that he sat that way most of the time with his pipe, was because he had varicose veins.
Uncle Don probably read 2 or 3 novels a week in his own rocking chair at the house. He was an avid reader, and he thought it was the best way to expose his senior English class to different viewpoints in the world. And we read everything from The Media is the Massage to, he even did 1 complete semester on the Bible, which pretty unusual.
You know, if he knew that you were thinking a certain way, you know, he would challenge that. And it was sort of the Socratic method, asking questions and having you answer them, and exposing us to a whole lot of different things.
To go back to your original question, those kinds of things, so we're talking late 50s, early 60s here, which was a very conformist period of time in our country. It was a place where people did what they were told and obeyed the rules and shot for, you know, corporate ladder accession and all that kind of stuff. And Don's perception was that that was not what the United States needed, or what the world needed, or what his students needed. And so he refused to accede to the rules of the game, where he always made it plain that you would do this and then you'd get the A, or you would do this and then and he always made it clear that it was going to be much harder than that. And you're going to have to bear down and really focus if you're going to score here, right? And there were some parents who saw what was happening. They saw, he's asking my kid to do stuff that every other kid in the world thinks is impossible, and my kid's doing it. This can't be all wrong. And then, of course, he was so witty and so humorous that every time they interviewed, you know, it was a great story and a good storyline. And I still keep thinking of him as, instead of being Sir Thomas Thom of Applewell, the only knight whose armor didn't squeak, I think of Don as being Sir Doniston, I don't know. The only English teachers whose kids didn't care if it was impossible, they would do it anyway.
The very first time I ever laid eyes on Don Hollingsworth was in our assembly one Friday when we had assemblies in the old assembly room. And this man came on stage. He was kind of cool, kind of sat down at the piano, talked about life and everything, and he started playing classical music. Then he kind of went into banging out all this really fun music. And I thought, that's a really neat guy. He thinks out of the box.
Senior English was something that people, I think, looked forward to but also feared, because Uncle Don would require that you read a book a week and then you were required to bring into class an outline that was pro or con. And you'd hand them in, and he would casually look through them and pick out your worst outline and say, you've got 20 minutes to write a 500-word paper according to this outline that you prepared. So I think, and it didn't matter the size of the book. It could have been The Fountainhead, which in fact was one of the books. He didn't give us extra time for size, but I think what was profound about that opportunity was he made us think. And he made us really create a construct of an argument to either support a theory or deny it. And to be forced to think at the age of 16 was a pretty remarkable feat. And he would give us a little F for every few words we didn't make it.
I've heard him referred to as crazy, ridiculous. Things would get thrown in class, all sorts of things. But he inspired an awful lot of people to attempt things that they never thought was possible until they survived his senior English class.
So if you run into people around Lexington, I'm 65, and I see people that are 75 that went to Lafayette, they had Don. And they're still memorizing the prologue to Canterbury Tales. They still know the same, when you hear it over and oh, you either had Don or you went to Sayre. And these kids at Lafayette had to memorize all this fun stuff. Jabberwocky and all the rest of it. Tweedledee and Tweedledum. And Shoon the frumious Bandersnatch. Beware the Jub. But that, it sticks with you. You can't get rid of it. I've tried. It's hard to lose it. But that's just part of it. Part of the things that stick in your mind. And it's different for everybody.
Did junior high back in the old building again? I remember Earl Remus and can still quote the Jabberwocky. 'Twas Brillig in the slithy toes. Did Gyre and Gimble in the Wayball. Mimsy were the Morrow Groves and the Mome Rass outgrabe.
We were to stand in front of the class and recite the first 14 lines of Chaucer, which is actually not written in English, to tell you the truth. And nor is the way you would try to pronounce those words and letters together. Is there any hint about what the pronunciation would be? It was nothing like ordinary English. And he wanted the pronunciation to be correct. And to give us a model for the correct pronunciation, he stood up and he read the entire poem to us in class and read them with all the wrong pronunciations. But our job was to recite them on Monday correctly pronounced. And the only thing we had was a brief auditory moment of Don mispronouncing them in the classroom. So we all had to make up our own thoughts about what that was, and somehow or other, we had to get it past him on Monday.
To have to memorize, I still remember the ode to the Canterbury Tales. I could recite it right now. One that april with a shore sota, throughout the march as persa to the rota, bothered every vein in which liquor of which virtue engendered is the fleur. When Zephyr said upon his, never mind, we'll stop there. But in any case, it's amazing. I didn't even think of that. I haven't thought of that for 20 or 30 years at least.
I don't think anybody was ever afraid of him, but he enjoyed it much. He loved teaching and he loved the kids.
In those years, Sayre was something unique. The whole idea of the school was to have a college preparatory curriculum. And no school in the state at that point advertised that it was preparing students for college, or that it was college preparatory. The curriculum in those years, beginning in '63, when with Don Hollingsworth, was what would be called a classical private school curriculum. For instance, Latin was taught, and Dorothy Wolfram, who was the third form head, taught Latin. That never proved terribly successful, to be honest, because most kids didn't particularly enjoy Latin. But in 1963 and 64, those early years, Sayre was an experiment in education. That's the way we thought of it, as experimental education. And there were all these innovations that were supposedly new to the school. One of them was the foreign language lab, which had booths with little earphones, and students could go in the booths and sit in the booths and listen to foreign language. French and Spanish were the two languages.
Uncle Don had this broad vision of what was needed. So in 1961, we were it was the heart of the Cold War. And so he went out and found a Russian teacher to teach third graders Russian because, you know, we needed to be able to communicate with our enemies.
Another area that would become important to the school, although at the time nobody paid much attention to it, was introduced in 1967 by Bill Williams. Now, Bill Williams, who eventually would become headmaster at Sayre, came to the school also in 1963 and was hired to teach mathematics. He became the director of the fourth form, or upper school, grades 9 through 12. And there wasn't much interested in athletics. He was very academic. But it was Bill Williams who in 1967 recognized the growing importance of computers and computer education, and in that year made arrangements with the University of Kentucky to bring computers and that technology to the school. They had to punch out cards for their programs. At night, those cards, punch cards, would be taken over to the University of Kentucky and run on their mainframe computer, and then the results, the programs that these kids had written, would come back to Sayre. So Sayre was the first school in the state in that regard to integrate computer science with the regular curriculum and make it available.
He went to IBM and he bought one of their computers that they weren't using anymore. They had gone a step beyond. And it was the old computer that you had to do the cards. The board gave him such grief because I was there when they decided that the students would never need to know about a computer. Well, the computer was expensive to operate because, first of all, they had to make a room for it, a whole room. It was huge. It was huge. Don made it available for all of the children, 1st grade through 12th grade, to have usage time on the computer. Well, those children just went wild. It got to the point that the teachers had to use it as a reward for them to get to go to the computer room. And the board members still complained. Margaret Shackelford
and she managed the kitchen and the buttery for years. And she put on, catered a lot of banquets and did a lot of things. And she was just a really outstanding person. Her whole demeanor and her attitude and her sunny disposition and all that, we had a great feeling about the buttery at that time.
Jay and I, every Thanksgiving morning, would get up and we'd go hunt rabbits at Holly's Hill. And we'd get 8 to 12 rabbits and we'd take them over to Margaret. She lived over next to Winburn. And we'd take them over to Margaret because Margaret loved her rabbits on Thanksgiving. Bill Neltner was the head maintenance person, but I think in my junior and senior year I did more work. I mowed the yard more than Bill Neltner did, I know, because I was always in trouble.
And then we had some other interesting janitors, all capable, all different.
Sayre was a place that a lot of schools like Sayre have very clear admissions requirements. You got to score this on a test or score that on a test to get into their exclusive school. And Sayre was different. You had to impress Don Hollingsworth with the idea that you were smart, that you were quick, that you were witty, that you could do these kinds of things, you were up to the challenge. You had to be a sort of in that mold kind of guy. And even as a kid, it had to be a little bit visible. Mm-hmm. And then you could be a Sayre student. And mainly it was, from Don's point of view, quote, be smart. Then you could be at Sayre.
Don has said, I've heard him say many times, I don't care what a kid thinks, just as long as they think.
Now, I came to Sayre in the fall of '62, and I was in the 10th grade. And so that was the leading class at the time. We had the 10th grade, and then we added the 11th grade, and we added the 12th grade. In the 10th grade, we were still over in the old building. And, you know, it was an old building. You know, it had been dorms, had been any number of things. And there weren't that many kids in the class. I don't know, 15, 17, something like that. Not that many. And really a wild and varied bunch of folks. I mean, there were just all kinds of different people in this school at that time, in my class. The school was really, I mean, for people that were there at that time, they realized, I mean, there were so many Hollingsworths there from and Wiedemans and everybody's, you know, and our neighbors, you know, our neighbors that we grew up with, you know, Tom Sayre and Tim, Tim Bailey and the Stone family. They were all our neighbors.
Everywhere I looked, there was a relative. There were relatives. I mean, all these people that were there were related. I'm like, this, you know, what an interesting place. You know, there's a picture in this book. It says, yes, fella, do I go to Sayre? And what was that remark about my blazer? Don't worry, man, you'll love this place. We're just one great, big, happy family. Anyway, like it or not, it's quite a school.
This is how Sayre was. The personalities at Sayre, not only the all my classmates and the sophomores, juniors, seniors, it was just a mesh of personalities, and there was always a measure of respect.
And at Sayre, for me, being in athletics really helped me structure my academics, where I did better in school if I was in season, so to speak. So if I was in a basketball season, I knew when I had to get my homework done and did it, and it was much more of a structure, and you knew what you had to get done and when you had to make those deadlines.
We wore school uniforms. Father went up and visited, I think, Kent, among others, before he started, and decided everybody had to have a uniform. So we had a blazer, you know, and when we were seniors, we had a different color blazer than everybody else. And, you know, you had to wear the blazer and the tie from October through April, and, you know, September and May, you got a little more flexibility.
I even remember when we first decided on blue and gold as the colors of Sayre, and Spartans as the name. There was actually a group meeting and a vote on that.
I can remember Tom Sayre and my brother Tolley coming around to the cafeteria telling everybody, hey, we're going to have a name, a sports name. And we were all voting on it. The whole school was voting on it. It was probably 250, 300 kids at the time. And my brother Toll came around and he says, we want to be Spartans. And so we all voted and we were Spartans.
We had the blue and gold team thing at Sayre was one of Father's establishments that was really cool. And if you were the oldest person in your family, if you were blue, then the rest of your family had to be blue too, because we couldn't have contention within the family. Everybody had to be on the same team, right? So Hollingsworths were all gold. And that was fun. We had intramural games to establish, and it was not only athletic, it was scholastic. That's the way the blue and gold teams worked out. And at the end of the year, somebody would win either blue or gold, and then it was a big deal.
We were a close-knit group between the blue and the golds, and I would tell you, I was a gold. I know that was a great aspect of the Spartans and the team spirit that was such a part of Sayre. And I think that was especially prevalent in the sports. I remember when Uncle Don would come in the C.V. Whitney Gymnasium when it was first built, and he would have one side be blue, and the other side, all the blues had to be there, and all the golds had to be there, and he would start a rally that was effectively a shouting match. Do you remember those? Blue, gold, blue, gold. And it was such a fabulous internal competition of team spirit.
And we needed a fight song, so my mother, being the music director, took, I think, Kenyon College's music and applied her words to the fight song. So we were Sayre Spartans, and we had a fight song all by 1964.
We're few in number, yet in this we're strong. Our spirit binds us by a double throng. With laud and honor and of high esteem, come nigh, raise high the banner on the green. Boom, 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 laud and honor to the Spartans. Bring them on to fame. Respect for old Sayre's name. The blue and gold will ever lead you, with cheering to the fore. We'll give a shout for Sayre Spartans, to ring forevermore. Fight! I think it's supposed to be win forevermore. There you go. Win forevermore. Yay!
The first person there was a black man in his white coat, and he would stand there and open the door for the children coming to early grade school and kindergarten. They'd come in the back, drive in the back, and he'd stand there and open the door, help them in. He was old, and I don't think he stayed but a year or two after Don went, but I can remember that so well. And I thought, this is so neat to have this man here.
I mean, everybody had sort of a can-do attitude, and even when we had heavy snow, that was back when we had heavy snow, one day, Don drove in on his tractor because his car couldn't work, and kept the school open even though, only 10% of the, or 30%, whatever it was, got there. And the people that got there were all from out of town. You know, they could make it. The people in town were the ones who couldn't make it. And so there was, again, there was this, you know, never quit, drill sergeant type of attitude that pervaded.
When the WLAP would call up and he'd say, well, how did you get to work? And he said, well, I drove. And he says, okay, you know, we didn't have buses, parents drove. And so his logic was, you know, you have to do 188 days a year or whatever. Why put it off? Let's get it done. And that was Pop's thinking, you know. But when we had, I can remember we got hung in the snow coming home on a Thursday. I mean, it was 2 feet deep. And I can remember going through the circle and stuff, and these poor mothers and sliding around and throwing kids in. And it was, but Sayre did not have snow days. We did not have snow days. But I remember one when we got stuck on Berea Road trying to come home, and she, of course, carried the neighbors' kids, and there were enough of us to push her through that snowdrift. But I remember it specifically being 2 to 3 feet of snow. And Mother didn't want to have to fight it the next day, and she voiced her opinion, and by golly, we had a snow day.
My father was the guy that went and got it done. Don was the one that thought about it and found a way to make it work. That's why Sayre was so diversified. You know, you couldn't just have all the special kids in Lexington going to one school. You needed somebody to offset the eco-socioeconomic, I mean, it was the economical forecast there. So we had all kinds of walks of life when we were there. I mean, we wanted athletic teams. Well, you had to bring in some kids that could play sports. You know, the kids that played tennis every day at the country club, they weren't much in the way of football players. Of course, we didn't have many great ones, but the ones we had, you remembered. And we had some Jim Dandies in those days. We had the kids that came from the Catholic schools that came in to play. We had kids that had been thrown out of every public school they were in. We welcomed them at Sayre. Some of them even got the special invitation to live at Don's house. And if you were one of those privileged kids, you got the extra special treatment because he held no prisoners at home. It was not a cakewalk living at his place. If you were late for dinner, you didn't get to eat. Food was gone. They were on a budget. So there could be 12 of you there and only 10 hot dogs. You better be one of the first 10. You know, then you go out and bale hay all day.
And our house was open to everyone, and I mean, there were 40 exchange students, and if you didn't get placed in Kentucky, you came to our house until we found someplace, you know, they found someplace for you. So our house was open from 1950 to the 80s. It was open to everyone, and my poor mom, I don't know how, you know, we got a couple extra mouths to feed and more laundry and all that, and then she'd go work and have to work full day and then come back and feed everybody, and you know, that's just ridiculous.
That was the other cool thing about Sayre. We had lots of foreign exchange. We had Bojan Krevic and Igor from Yugoslavia and Kai Trebes from Germany. I loved Kai lived with us. He became a lifelong friend. I think Jay even went and visited him in Germany later. So it was great that we had the opportunity to have that kind of worldview by bringing people in to Sayre from other countries. Pertti Ailio from Finland was staying with us. Barbara DeMonico, because she came during her summer break from Brazil. So we had quite a diverse input.
We had Spanish, we had Taiwanese, we had Japanese, and it was a melting pot of sorts, and it was good for everybody.
Integration. There wasn't a lot. We had Margaret Shackelford, who ran the kitchen, and I guess it was late 60s when it was time. And of course, the present day students, we had no idea what any of that was about. You know, everybody that grew up probably had a maid at the house and a cook and things like that. You know, we're standing in a place where my mother was raised across the street. They had 2 cooks when she was a child. But Margaret, the cook at Sayre, had been there forever. And she just loved us. She loved those kids. She'd take great care of us. Her son, JJ, came to Sayre. Margaret's son, JJ, was, he was probably the first black student I ever encountered at Sayre. And a wonderful guy. Great kid.
The state required to have a black teacher in every school and teaching black history. And so if Don didn't hire one, they were going to send him one. Well, he didn't want one the state was going to send. He wanted to pick his own. So he got himself a black teacher to teach black history. It was resented that he was there and teaching those students what he was there to teach. I don't know why they couldn't get it through their head. They couldn't understand why it was necessary that we have a teacher, but they fought it. I was there when Mr. Clark came, and we had some students too, some minority students who came in, and we had one girl who was accepted to Harvard. I don't know what she ever did, but she was quite a good scholar, and we had some excellent minority students maybe in the school.
The music teacher at Sayre when Don went was Mrs. Henderson, who had a great background, had music major and could play several instruments, and she was doing the upper school music, and Mrs. Herod did the lower school music. And her office was the little red schoolhouse, which she had given her for the music building. So she had inherited some students who had learned how to play in their grade school or wherever they'd gone to school before they came to Sayre. Jim Hopkins was lovely on the violin. Mrs. Henderson would play the cello, he'd play the violin, and somebody else had an instrument. I'm trying to think, but it was 3 people. And one time there was a reception in the old Sayre parlor, and here in the corner was this 3-piece thing playing lovely music. I was just overwhelmed how neat it was. Anyway, she worked at teaching and playing with whatever she had, and she was doing a lovely job, and I was so impressed with her. Well, IBM decided to send her husband to Texas, and she decided to go with him. And I thought that was terrible. I thought she should stay at Sayre School. So her husband goes to Texas. So she left. So Don said, call up some of those gals that were in school with you. And there were a lot of girls that had music majors, and I was not. And but I was in chorus and band and stuff. And see if anybody wants a part-time job teaching music here at Sayre. So I looked in the UK Annual and found some people and looked up some gals. And when they found out how little the pay was and how little you had to work with, nobody wanted it. And so Don said, well, I guess you're it. I said, I'm the new music teacher. She said, well, you got to fill in till we find somebody. So that's how I started doing music. So we happily had students entering Sayre School who were musicians. It was just by luck that there were kids who came to school for various reasons. Their parents put them in at Sayre, and they had learned their trade. They'd learned from good teachers. And we did have a piano teacher on staff who taught piano to any students there, Mrs. Cheek, and she'd been there for years. We had good pianists always.
We had Hilda Lamb, who won the state in piano and violin. She was #1 in the state. She was in our tiny little orchestra.
It used to be a slight bone of contention, was that the little orchestra we'd play the marching in music, and then everybody gets seated and stuff, and then there'd be a time in the program when the orchestra would play a piece. And twice in those, how many years, 15 years Don was there, and twice he ignored the orchestra at commencement. And we, 2 different times he just was going, and he just overlooked us, I hope, and went ahead. And we used to laugh at that. Did he think we weren't quite good enough? And sometimes we weren't real good. Mr. Ballou was our string teacher and violinist, and he was excellent, an excellent violinist. He was half gypsy and half Scotch, and his father had been a famous gypsy zimbalist player, and the zimbalist is like a big lying down harp or something, and he played it with mallets. And he had wonderful tone and wonderful bowing, and it was such a help in the music. So he was my aide de camp in the music business. I loved the Sayre singers, and it was loads of fun. We had that period in the afternoon, around 2 o'clock, I think, was about 25 minutes, and it was a period where you did extra stuff or went to the study hall or something. And that was our music period. So the kids would come in and get set up, and we'd go over this thing and learn this part, and then the bell would ring and it was over. It was very short. But I was lucky that there were a lot of young people who liked to sing and could look at the music, more or less read music if they had it in front of them. And it was lots of fun for me to teach that group.
Leslie Hollingsworth was an outstanding music teacher with chorus and everything. She was always cheerful. I never saw her in a bad mood, and she was just real lively and interested in what you were doing, and just a great person. She really is.
There weren't any boys in the choir. Leslie had the choir when I got there, and there weren't any boys in it, or maybe there's just 1 or 2. Well, you know, you can't really. You need tenor and you need bass. And Don asked me, so I started singing with the choir. I was baritone, so I could sing either part, either the tenor part or the bass part. Don asked me to take over the choir, and of course, you know, a young male, and football and basketball and track coach, I could recruit the boys, and I told Don I wanted a feeder system. You know, you start kids at 6th grade or something, and you feed them up to the varsity football team. So I developed a feeder system. Don gave me a vocal music class, required 1 semester of vocal music, both 7th and 8th grades. And then at the 9th grade, that's where the choir was 9 through 12. And I went to Transylvania University. Donald Prendle was the choir director there. I sung for 2 years with that choir and toured with them. And I took a conducting class with Prendle. Prendle was a former Fred Waring chorale rehearsal director. Marvelous experience. Well, I couldn't play the piano. My biggest deficit was I couldn't play the piano. So I took the music from the choir the previous year from Transylvania, and that's what I used to teach the Sayre choir. It took us probably at least 2/3 of the year before we could do a program, because I couldn't play the piano. To me, the most wondrous sound is an a cappella sound. Nothing, just the blend of voices. And we did a exchange with Tate's Creek, and I'll put our sound up against Tate's Creek's anytime. The thing that hurt me the worst about leaving Sayre was leaving that choir. It's an emotional thing, you know. And the hardest thing I had to do was, after the last concert, I drove the bus back to school, and I had to get up and tell them that I wasn't coming back.
We bought a second-hand bus, and there are people alive today who tell you about driving that Sayre bus, or not knowing. A young lady who came to teach PE didn't know how to drive a bus, but other than losing a few of the mirrors on the side, she didn't really wreck the bus. And it was very interesting, and they used to make remarks about the yellow. Then later we went to blue buses, who were our own buses, you know. Oh, we were really uptown when we got our own buses.
I remember driving old Blue out to, it was a standard shift, 4 on the floor, that didn't have a handle on the gear shift because somebody broken it off, and they chiseled it off, and a new one wouldn't fit on there, and so you just had this like pickaxe sticking up, and that's what you shifted gears.
we were riding in buses that looked like, you know, rejects from World War I. And they would break down on the way to the Shorts farm, which is our athletic field, and we could never trust them to either get started or to even run. And yet, for some reason, they kept those for a long time until they ended up with some more modern type buses. But even the seats on those were the old spring-loaded type seats, and they were oftentimes, you know, cut or something, and just amazing that we made it through.
I was president of the pep club. We're all loaded up to watch the football game, drive up to Beechwood. We're on our way home, the bus breaks down. Had to find multiple, you know, no cell phones, no nothing. Good luck with finding out a way to get home, but somehow we did it. And John Hackworth reminded me of that just last month. How funny was that?
Every time we went somewhere on a bus, it was always a good thing that my father was following, because that bus broke down about 5 out of 8 trips. That bus was broken down on the side of the road. Grunwald scratching his head, and my father would get out and come up, and he'd tinker under the hood. They'd get it running again. And Tom, y'all need a bus. You know, this thing's on its last leg. You only need baling wire and some orange juice cans. You make any of it work.
Most terrifying thing for me, the first days of that job, the school had just bought 2 International Harvester buses painted blue. And when I reported the first day for work, I was riding a motorcycle, so I parked in the back driveway and went up to Kirk Buse's office, and Kirk said, "Oh, by the way, can you drive a school bus?" Well, for $1,000, I said I could drive a Sherman tank. So I said, sure.
Mr. Short lived right on Paris Pike, right next to the Lexington Country Club. And he had a front field that looked like a good place for kids to play, and he designated this big front field as the Sayre playing fields. So there was a picture in the paper of Mr. Short on his tractor mowing the fields, and here's this well-to-do horseman, you know, big in the community, mowing the fields, getting ready for Sayre School. And he was a wonderful benefactor, he and his wife, and their daughter, Julie. So all of a sudden, Sayre had playing fields and people who said, let's do these games, and however we started. And Don loved football. Of course, everybody in Kentucky loved basketball.
I'll tell you one other thing Father did that was mandatory. Everybody did athletics. And Father's bottom line was everybody needed exercise. No excuses. No excuses. You're in, on the bus, busing you out of town to run around these playing fields and busing you back. You know, and you did that. The younger classes did it earlier, and then the athletic teams or whatever they did them later. And you know, you were there till, I mean, we were there all the time till 6 o'clock at least. You know, we were out the door in the morning at, you know, 7:45, zoom, and if you missed the ride into town, you missed the ride into town. He left, so he didn't wait. You know, and in the evening, you know, 6 o'clock or so, we were home because we had to eat by 7, I think. I don't know.
Milk the cow.
No, we didn't eat by 6.
Yeah, we did. Every night.
Couldn't have eaten by 6 every night because we couldn't have been back all the time. And we did have to milk the cow, and there were other times. So it was, there may have been times it was 6, but at school, you couldn't accomplish all those things, you know. But it was a full day. And it was a family thing.
When he needed a PE teacher, he found Tom, and I don't know how Tom found him, but they got together. And at the same time, Tom had an accident on his motorcycle and had broken his leg, and so he was on crutches. And that was very interesting. But it was great. It was great to have him on the team.
Swam for Wagner High School, which is where I first met Don Hollingsworth. He was the swim coach at Lafayette, and he would bring the Lafayette team to the old Henry Clay Hotel. I can't remember, in downtown Louisville. And there was a small pool in the Henry Clay Hotel. So we'd have a swim meet there. And then I would see him at swim meets here in Lexington for the state meets, which were held at the Coliseum, over the Coliseum on Euclid. I attended the University of Kentucky, where I met my wife. In the summer of 1963, I took a real long canoe trip from Lake Superior to Hudson Bay. And that canoe trip, about 1,600 mile canoe trip, profiled in the Courier Journal, and especially the Sunday edition. And on one occasion I was still working on my degree at UK. I was a senior, and I'd used up a small grant and aid in swimming that I had at UK Division I swimmer. And a fellow that worked in the athletic department over there named Kirk Muse had just taken a job at Sayre. And Kirk saw me in the alumni gym and said, "How would you like to have a job?" And I said, "Well, doing what?" And he said, "Well, working at this private school that they're trying to get started called Sayre School," which I'd never heard of. And the headmaster there is Don Hollingsworth. You might remember him. He was Lafayette's swim coach. I said, "Oh, I remember Mr. Hollingsworth." And he said, "Well, come over to school and interview to help in the sports department." And I said, "Okay." I said, "How much does it pay?" He said, $1,000 for the year. Well, that was big money. $1,000 was big money because my grant and aid had ended. And I had just taken a job, in addition to that, as a dorm counselor in Hagen Hall, which had opened in 1960. So I was a dorm counselor, and I was going to work at Sayre School. So I went over to Sayre School. The old porch was still on the back of the main building. And Kirk Muse's office was upstairs, and there I met for the first time Bobby Gail Amato, who would be the wife of the future mayor of Lexington, and she worked as the girls' sports coach. I was hired to help in the sports department. So my first job was to drive elementary and middle school kids out to the Sayre field on Paris Pike and have football practice, which I knew nothing about. I was not a football player, didn't know diddly squat. Dee became the director of women's PE at Sayre School in those early years and was popular because she was not only a pretty young lady, but she really was enthusiastic in whatever she did. And the big sports for girls in those years was field hockey.
In basketball, Mrs. Burkle and Mrs. Kaki Hester also were the influential people there. And it's interesting when you think about ages. Kaki Hester is a good friend of mine and my sister's, and they weren't that much older than we were really when they would come in fresh off of teaching, and they were maybe 5 years older than we were, and we kind of thought they knew everything. Maybe they did, but they they learned too with us. I think we learned from each other. Tom Grunwald was one of our pioneers of so many different hats that he wore. So it wasn't the classic coach of Coach Walton or Coach Burkle or Coach Hester, but Coach Hester did some things too. But we were kind of self-coached because we were doing swimming otherwise. So they just kind of got us together. So there wasn't an actual swim coach. But in other fields, in field hockey and in basketball, we had some influential coaches. Mrs. Burkle was our coach in basketball, and she just really inspired you to go out and do your best. And we had a really good record, and it was interesting during my transition. We went from tunics to shorts to play, so the uniforms changed. Our spirit didn't change, but we did change in what we were playing in. A lot of people probably don't know what a tunic is, but you wear bloomers, and it's not quite like a cheerleading uniform. But then we started with the new uniforms halfway through my high school years.
The coach at that point that Don hired also in 63 or 64, I can't remember exactly when, I think 64, was Danny Hill. And he became the first football coach at the school. And in those years, all male teachers were expected to work after school in the sports department. So you had your regular school day, 8 to 3:15, and then after you taught your regular classes, you went over to the gym for sports.
Danny Hill was a swimmer on the Lafayette swim team that Uncle Don coached, and Danny Hill got fired from Sayre for being too loud and too mean. But those of us that knew Danny and played under him, I loved him. If the coach wasn't barking at you, you might as well go to the shower and turn in your uniform. He barked at everybody. And I was, as my father would say, that's the sort of thing that builds character. Danny built character, I'll say that. We had the finest uniforms, the finest equipment. Back before 1966, Danny Hill had somebody provide washed socks, washed uniforms every day. You had a basket with your stuff, and I don't even know if they do it now. And uniform-wise, Danny Hill we had uniforms, we had equipment, we had the best that was available at the time. And I really enjoyed Danny Hill. I was sorry to see him go.
Babe Walton was hired to coach football and basketball at the school, and Babe would coach football and basketball until 1976, which was really the last year that we had a viable football team.
I think Babe was a very gentle man. He understood the game of football, and he understood what he was doing at Sayre. I think Babe made a lot more money doing something else in the construction business than he did what he did teaching football, basketball, and life skills at Sayre to the young men and or young women he came in contact with. Because he wanted people to excel at whatever position they had. And he understood that at Sayre, you're not going to get all the great athletes. But he had to mold a team based upon what was offered to him. That's a great lesson in life. Mold a team from what's offered you. And he did it with a lot of grace. He didn't seek a lot of accolades in his life, but I think he deserved more than he probably received, because he was the leader, you know, and, and to lead a bunch of people who were former football players themselves and keep them focused on the task at hand, that's not an easy job. At the same time, trying to direct some 9th, 10th, 11th, and 12th graders to achieve a goal on the football field, which was to learn to take the good and the bad. We had a great group of sponsors that were parents that helped put the thing together. Some of them had played football with Babe in high school, and so they knew what kind of guy he was, and so they chipped in and had the parents club, and without them, you know, it doesn't happen. It just doesn't happen. And because Babe had such a relationship with them, then it was able to occur.
Headmaster's notes, class of 1976. Another class is graduating from Sayre. As the door closes, another opens, and so it is in every life. In the years past, I have stood at the door saying goodbye to those who have shared some special moments with us here at Sayre. This year is different. I will be moving through the door along with our seniors. It's a stepping out from the familiar to the unfamiliar. In the past months, I've been saying goodbye to a place that has been my life for 14 years. Some of our seniors, it has been almost the same length of time. It is given to us to walk a path for a time, sharing what we have and are, and then go out our separate ways. At some future time, we meet again to recall those moments that seemed rare and special, and find it in each other what time and circumstances has wrought. Each morning is always a wonderful and surprise, for each life has been filled with experiences that have called for the continued growth of each of us. We must meet again. May your life has been as rich and full as my own. Don Hollingsworth, Headmaster.
For graduation, we had a song that we sung from the balcony, again a cappella. God, I'll never forget it. Gaude Amus. It was very short, very, very unusual, but it was fitting for that occasion.
Graduated in '65. I was the youngest guy in the class by a month. Bob Miller was a month older than me. He was also 16, and he graduated. There were 17 of us in that class. Bob was a National Merit finalist. Another girl was a semifinalist as a National Merit bunch and went on. We had some good scores in that group to get started. You know, I'm happy to have been a part of that experience. It was challenging in some ways, you know, but it was a family experience for us. It wasn't something that was foreign. It was a community, and it was really a family celebration for our family, Sayre, and the beginning and the growth and the evolution of Sayre. To be able to track my sister from kindergarten all the way through high school, I mean, that's really cool. To see the whole group come through there and be a part of it, and be a part of the foundation. That's, you know, it's a creative thing, and it's like, so I come back home, you know, I may not have been in the building at Sayre for years, but walk in and I feel good, just like when I walk into Mount Horeb Church, you know, I feel like, well, you know, I haven't been away. It's nice to be home, and that's kind of the way I feel about Sayre. You know, it was a different school when I was there than it is today, but it was a wonderful opportunity to be a part of.
So we were just told, figure it out. If you want something, figure out how to make it happen. And I think that has also been a touchstone of my life, because no is the beginning of the conversation. If I took no, I wouldn't have developed one project, including this one, because I started on the suggestion that this needed to happen about 3 administrations ago, or maybe 4. And here we are now, and it happened, and I attribute a lot of that persistence and tenacity to early childhood education. What we had to do at Sayre to make something happen. It was a great experience. It has, I could talk for about 10 hours on various thoughts about what Sayre has meant to me, and frankly what it continues to mean. And I'm so thankful that my children got to experience it as well. And the fact that we are still, so many of us, we're still in each other's lives, and how great is that 50, 60 years later. So thanks.
You know, people forget about the history of Sayre. They forget about somebody's, of their true worth to Sayre. And you can't discard people.
I guess the one thing I learned the most at Sayre was through Don Hollingsworth, because he showed you that you don't have to be like everybody else. Be yourself.
But it was a place that's always meaningful to me. As we left and came back, when we visit, my brother Dunn says he only knows his way around town from Sayre. So if you got to go anywhere, you go from point A to Sayre to point B, because that's how you know how to get there. And that's not a bad analogy for the impact it had on a lot of people's lives.
Well, I just think that the whole Sayre experience for me was the right fit. I think that children and young people can get a not the right fit for them to be stimulated, whether it's in academics or athletics. And I think that any parent should try to get that right fit for students, whether it's in class or school. And as an orthopedic surgeon who deals with a lot of young people in doing too much in sports that get hurt because they're throwing the ball too much or playing year-round sports, I think you need to, in some way, just back up and reflect on what's the right thing for that child, and that's going to be different for each child. And I think the size of Sayre and the opportunities that Sayre afforded me, you can't trade that in for anything. So Coach Walton was on your side of football, and he had other brothers that since I've met that were all into coaching, and so I think you see those role models and you remember them. But I think just the whole mix of what Sayre put together, all the teachers and your classmates too. I'm closer to several of my classmates, Lillian Webb, Parr, and Allison Wickman. I've known them and their families, since we started at Sayre in the 3rd or 4th grade. So I think you become really a family, not sounding corny, but you are the Sayre family. And just like you're doing this interview, I think you do it for the right reasons, and it reinforces what your parents reared you to do, which is to always do the right thing. And I think that this is just a good family environment to create that for your children if you're so fortunate to meet the Sayre people. And I'm sure that the beat goes on, and Don Hollingsworth got it right, and his predecessors should keep on doing it. And Sayre's got a rich history, and my grandfather's sisters went to Sayre when it was the women's college, so way back when.
Sayre School was an interesting school. Don Hollingsworth was an interesting person. He gave teachers a free range. They could be creative, and there were not many holes on what they could and could not do. My time at Sayre was enjoyable. My best years was teaching. I really enjoyed teaching.
Was it 61 to 75? It was a period of time of building. People who were there were dedicated to improving and bringing all they had into the school, and they brought their very best, and they taught their very best, and we tried to do everything we could to help the students, and everybody, I think, enjoyed being there, and everybody felt included. It was very inclusive, and it was just a wonderful work situation, and it was a wonderful learning situation as well.
It was, you didn't make any money, you didn't plan for retirement, but damn, it was a fun place to go to. And you could watch kids grow, At least you watch yourself grow. There was a period of time in which rich and poor got together, and because of the leadership that was there, the Don Hollingsworth version of Sayre was totally right for me. I wouldn't fit there now, but it was great while I was there.
That school felt so different when you went in it. The relationships were different, the feelings were different, the amount of wit that was just floating free in the atmosphere was different. Right. It was uplifting, and it was inspirational, and it asked people to be their sort of wittiest, most challengeable best when they were there, a piece of the whole deal. And it invited them to step in and add, be a piece of it. And as a young faculty member, it was inspiring. It was inspiring to go to school every single day, and it just became irresistible.
On my computer at school, I had a list of students who married, who had dated in high school, and who later married. Bob Johnson and Donna Quillen were right at the top of the list, who met in high school and dated and married, high school sweethearts and so forth. So I had this long list of people who had met at school. So what I'm saying is Sayre School was a very special place. Now, it is a special place, And that remains true to this day. But I must say that there was something unique from 1965 to 1975 in that 10-year period that made the school unquestionably unique. I knew personally every family associated with the school, almost from kindergarten through the 12th grade. So did my wife. Kids in the high school knew kids in the lower and middle school. Kids in the high school helped set up the gym for chapels on Friday. Boys in the high school would go out and set up the jumps for the horse show. No teacher ever hesitated to ask students or a group of students to help with not only some project, but help me clean this up, help me do this. So there was a sort of a family, a community spirit that existed in those 10 years that sometimes I wonder if you still find that spirit to this day. Now, the school is small, and I'm sure that every group has its stories and tales, but those classes from 65 to 75 to 76, those were really magical years for me. So.
Is there anything else you want to say?
Not really.